The incident. The golden field stretched as far as the eye could see, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. The human colony on the planet Novara had thrived for decades, its people creating a peaceful community amidst the alien landscapes. Children ran freely, their laughter echoing through the air, unbothered by the dangers of the universe. Emily, a bright-eyed 10-year-old with a knack for solving puzzles, was among them. Her parents often joked that she was born to think her way out of trouble. Today, Emily was exploring the edges of the settlement, where the forest met the farmlands. She had always been curious, her mind eager to understand the unfamiliar plants and animals of Novara. Clutching a small notepad, she scribbled notes about a glowing flower she had just found. Its petals shimmered like stars, and she leaned closer, wondering if it might be safe to touch. Her moment of curiosity was shattered by a low, rumbling sound. The ground beneath her feet vibrated, and she looked up to see dark shapes descending from the sky. Massive alien ships, their hulls glinting ominously, broke through the clouds. Panic erupted in the colony as sirens blared and adults scrambled to gather their children. Emily's heart pounded as she ran toward the settlement. But the ships were faster. The Draxians, a notorious alien race known for their ruthlessness, descended upon the colony with terrifying efficiency. Their towering forms were covered in thick armor, their eyes glowing red with menace. They moved in organized lines, capturing anyone in their path. They didn't care about the human colony's peaceful existence. They saw humans as weak creatures, easy prey for their plans. Emily hid behind a stack of barrels near the food storage area, her small frame trembling. She watched as the Draxians herded people into their ships. The adults tried to resist, but the aliens' advanced weapons made any attempt futile. Emily clutched her notepad tightly, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. One of the Draxians barked orders in a harsh, guttural language. The aliens began scanning the area with devices that emitted a piercing blue light. Emily squeezed her eyes shut as the beam swept over her hiding spot. Her heart sank when the light paused, locking onto her location. Found one. A Draxian growled in broken English, yanking her out from behind the barrels. Emily kicked and screamed, but her small fists were no match for the alien's grip. She was thrown into a holding cell aboard the ship, joining a group of frightened children. The door slammed shut with a metallic clang, sealing them in darkness. The ship's engines roared to life, lifting off the ground. Through a small window, Emily saw the colony shrinking below her. Tears welled in her eyes as she thought of her parents. Were they safe? Did they even know she had been taken? The other children huddled together, their faces pale with fear. Some cried softly, while others stared blankly at the floor. Emily took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She couldn't afford to break down now. Her mind snapped into action, assessing their situation. The walls of the cell were smooth and metallic, with no obvious weak points. The only light came from a small panel near the door. Emily approached the panel, her curiosity outweighing her fear. It was covered in symbols she didn't recognize, but she noticed patterns in their arrangement. Her father, an engineer, had often told her stories about machines and how they worked. Maybe she could figure this out. "Hey," she whispered to the other children. "We can't just sit here. We have to do something." A boy with curly hair and glasses looked up. "What can we do?" "They're aliens. They'll kill us if we try anything." Emily shook her head. "They think we're just kids. They won't expect us to fight back." The boy hesitated, then nodded. Slowly, the other children began to gather around Emily, their fear giving way to a glimmer of hope. She pointed to the panel. "If we can figure out how this works, maybe we can get out." She pressed one of the symbols, and the panel emitted a faint hum. Encouraged, she tried another. The hum grew louder, but nothing else happened. Emily frowned, her mind working furiously. She needed more information. Suddenly, the ship jolted, throwing the children to the floor. The Draxians were speaking loudly outside the cell, their voices tense. Emily caught a few words in English. distress signal, and Earth response. Her heart leaped. Earth must have received a signal from the colony. Help was on the way. But would it arrive in time? As the ship sped deeper into space, Emily's resolve hardened. She didn't know when or if rescue would come, but she refused to sit idly by. The Draxians had underestimated her, and she intended to make them regret it. Tightening her grip on the notepad, she turned to the other children. "We're not giving up. Let's figure this out." The escape plan. The dim light of the holding cell flickered as the ship hurtled through space. Emily, with her notepad still clutched tightly, crouched near the small control panel. The other children watched her, their expressions a mixture of fear and cautious hope. Time was ticking, and Emily knew that waiting for rescue wasn't an option. They had to act, and they had to act now. "What if they catch us?" whispered Jacob, the curly-haired boy who had spoken earlier. Emily glanced at him, her voice steady. "Then we try again. But we don't stop trying." Her words, though simple, seemed to ignite a small spark in the others. They began to gather closer, whispering ideas and sharing observations. One of the older kids, a girl named Mia, pointed to the far corner of the room where a faint seam in the wall hinted at another compartment. Emily's mind raced. The Draxians were efficient, but their arrogance left gaps in their defenses. They likely assumed human children were incapable of causing any real trouble. That arrogance would be their mistake. "We'll need a distraction," Emily said, her voice firm. "If we can get them to focus somewhere else, I can figure out how to open the door." Jacob raised his hand, surprising everyone. "I'll do it. I can scream. Really loud." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the group, breaking some of the tension. Emily gave him a nod of approval. That might just work. Jacob positioned himself near the door, inhaled deeply, and let out an ear-piercing scream. The sound echoed through the metallic corridors, causing startled reactions from the other children. Moments later, the heavy thud of alien footsteps grew louder. "Quiet," barked a Draxian soldier as the door to the cell slid open. His glowing red eyes scanned the room, locking onto Jacob, who immediately burst into exaggerated sobs. The Draxian stepped inside, his towering form momentarily blocking the doorway. Emily seized the moment. With the precision of a child who'd spent countless hours tinkering with her dad's old gadgets, she pressed a sequence of buttons on the panel. A soft click echoed through the room, followed by a faint hiss. The second compartment in the corner of the cell slid open, revealing a narrow maintenance tunnel. "Go," Emily hissed, motioning for the others. One by one, the children slipped into the tunnel, their small frames barely making a sound. Emily was the last to enter, pausing only to glance at Jacob. He winked at her, a silent reassurance that he'd be okay, before bolting past the Draxian and out into the corridor, leading the alien on a wild chase. The maintenance tunnel was dark and cramped, but it offered a sliver of hope. Emily led the group, her fingers brushing against the cold walls as she searched for another control panel or access point. The faint hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the tunnel, a constant reminder of their precarious situation. "Where are we going?" Mia whispered. Emily didn't look back. "To the bridge. If we can find their navigation controls, maybe we can send a message." The children continued crawling through the tunnel, their movements slow and cautious. At one point, they passed a vent that overlooked a storage bay. Peering through the slats, Emily saw rows of alien equipment, strange, glowing devices, crates of unknown materials, and what appeared to be weapons. Her mind clicked into overdrive. Those weapons could be their key to survival. "We need to get down there," Emily said, pointing to the bay. "How?" another child asked. "It's guarded." Emily's eyes narrowed. She studied the layout of the bay, noticing a small maintenance hatch on the far side. If they could create another distraction, it might give them enough time to slip inside. "Mia," Emily said, turning to the older girl, "think you can make some noise near that hatch?" Mia hesitated, then nodded. What do I do? Kick it, bang on it, whatever you can. Just keep them distracted long enough for us to grab something useful. The plan was risky, but they had no other choice. Emily and the rest of the group waited in the shadows as Mia climbed out of the tunnel and darted toward the hatch. She began banging on it with all her strength, the sound echoing through the bay. Almost immediately, 2 Draxian guards rushed toward the noise, their weapons raised. Emily used the opportunity to slip into the bay, leading the others toward the crates. Her small hands moved quickly, grabbing anything that looked useful. Among the items, she found a strange device with a glowing blue core. It resembled a miniature reactor, and Emily had a gut feeling it was important. The group retreated back into the tunnel just as the Draxians realized the noise was a decoy. Mia barely made it back, her breaths ragged but her eyes alight with triumph. That was terrifying, she gasped, but kind of fun. Emily smiled, holding up the glowing device. Whatever this is, I think it's going to help us. The children pressed on, the atmosphere tense but hopeful. As they crawled through the tunnel, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The Draxians would soon notice their escape, and when they did, the consequences would be severe. But Emily wasn't just a frightened child anymore. She was a leader, and she had no intention of letting the Draxians win. Earth's response. The distant hum of the Draxian ship filled the engine room as Emily and the children crouched in the shadows, their stolen alien device casting a faint blue glow. Emily stared at the labyrinth of pipes and machinery, her mind racing. This was their chance to cripple the ship. But how? She didn't fully understand the alien technology, but she had learned enough from her father's stories about engineering to recognize one universal truth. All machines have weaknesses. Meanwhile, millions of miles away on Earth, alarms blared across the Earth Defense Council's headquarters. The distress signal from Novara Colony had been intercepted. Admiral Marcus, a grizzled veteran with a reputation for decisive action, stood before a holographic map of the galaxy, his jaw clenched. They took the children, Marcus growled, slamming his fist onto the console. The Draxians think they can abduct our young and walk away unscathed. They're about to learn how wrong they are. The council room buzzed with activity. Analysts decoded the signal, pinpointing the location of the Draxian ship. It was moving deeper into uncharted territory, likely heading toward a Draxian stronghold. Time was running out. We need a team, Marcus barked. I want our fastest ships and our most skilled operatives ready to launch in 10 minutes. A young officer hesitated. Sir, we don't know what defenses the Draxians have. Charging in might provoke. Marcus cut him off. Provoked. They abducted our children. There's no diplomacy to be had here. Send the fleet. Back on the Draxian ship, Emily was formulating her own plan. She had spent the last 10 minutes studying the engine room, noting the strange, glowing conduits that pulsed with energy. It was clear these conduits were critical to the ship's propulsion system. If they could disrupt it, the ship would be forced to stop, giving Earth's forces a chance to catch up. What do you think this thing does? Mia whispered, pointing to the glowing device Emily had taken from the storage bay. Emily squinted at the alien symbols etched into its surface. She couldn't read them, but she noticed that the device's core resembled the conduits in the engine room. An idea began to form. I think it's some kind of energy amplifier, Emily said. If we can connect it to one of those conduits, it might overload the system. Jacob frowned. And what happens if it blows up the whole ship? Emily shrugged. Then we make sure we're not here when it happens. The group worked quickly, guided by Emily's sharp instincts. They moved as silently as they could, navigating the maze of pipes and machinery until they found a conduit that seemed less guarded. Emily pried open a panel, revealing a swirling core of energy inside. Hold this, she whispered, handing the glowing device to Jacob. She carefully examined the connections inside the panel, her small hand steady despite the pressure. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps froze them in place. A pair of Draxian engineers entered the room, their guttural voices echoing. The children held their breath, pressing themselves into the shadows. One of the engineers glanced around, his glowing red eyes scanning the area. For a terrifying moment, it seemed he had noticed something, but then he turned back to his companion and continued walking. Emily exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. She couldn't afford to waste another second. She connected the device to the conduit, securing it with a piece of wire she had pulled from a nearby panel. "Now what?" Mia whispered. "Now we run," Emily replied. As the group retreated back into the maintenance tunnels, Emily activated the device with a final press of its glowing core. A faint hum began to build, growing louder with each passing second. By the time they reached the safety of the tunnel, the engine room was ablaze with light. Sparks flew from the conduit, and the ship shuddered violently. The Draxians immediately noticed the disturbance. Alarms blared, and soldiers scrambled to assess the damage. The captain's voice boomed over the intercom, ordering all hands to the engine room. Emily allowed herself a small smile. The distraction was working. At the same time, Earth's fleet was closing in. Admiral Marcus sat in the command chair of the Resolute, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons. The fleet was composed of sleek, agile ships designed for both speed and firepower. They had received the Draxian ship's location minutes earlier, thanks to the brief distress signal Emily had sent from the cell. "Engage stealth protocols," Marcus ordered. "We'll hit them before they even see us coming." As the fleet entered the sector, they picked up the Draxian ship on their scanners. It was drifting, its propulsion systems failing. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Looks like someone did half the job for us." Back on the Draxian ship, chaos erupted. The alien engineers struggled to contain the energy surge, but it was clear they were losing control. Emily and the children huddled in the tunnels, listening to the sounds of the alarms and shouting. "What happens now?" Jacob asked, his voice shaky. Emily stared at him, her expression resolute. "Now we wait for Earth to find us. And if they don't..." She paused, holding up the notepad where she had scribbled the ship's layout. "Then we take the bridge ourselves. Survival on the moon." The Draxian ship groaned like a wounded beast as it descended toward a barren, alien moon. Sparks flew from its damaged propulsion systems, and the hull burned red-hot from atmospheric entry. Emily and the children clung to each other in the narrow maintenance tunnel, the violent shaking throwing them against the walls. Despite the chaos, Emily's mind was racing. She knew this crash landing might be their only chance to escape. The ship hit the moon's surface with a thunderous impact, sending a shockwave rippling across the desolate landscape. Inside, lights flickered and died, leaving the corridors bathed in an eerie red emergency glow. Alarms blared, and the Draxian crew shouted orders in their guttural language, scrambling to assess the damage. Emily peered out through a vent, her sharp eyes scanning the corridor. "This is it," she whispered. "We have to get out now." The children nodded, their fear replaced by a quiet determination. Emily led them out of the tunnel, moving quickly and silently. The Draxians were distracted, their focus on the crippled ship and the hostile environment outside. The group slipped through the shadows, avoiding patrols, until they found a hatch leading to the moon's surface. The hatch hissed open, and a blast of cold air hit them. The moon's landscape was harsh and unwelcoming, a wasteland of jagged rocks and swirling dust storms. Emily's small boots crunched against the rocky ground as she scanned the horizon. There was no sign of civilization, only miles of barren terrain. "Where do we go?" Maya asked, her voice trembling slightly. Emily turned to the group, her expression calm but firm. "Away from the ship. They'll come looking for us, but we can't let them catch us." The children began to move, their small figures blending into the rugged landscape. Emily kept them moving at a steady pace, her mind constantly assessing their surroundings. She noticed the faint glow of strange, bioluminescent plants scattered across the rocks and made a mental note of their patterns. Her instincts told her that these small details might become important later. As they trekked across the moon, Emily's group encountered their first major obstacle, a deep ravine cutting across their path. The children gathered at the edge, peering nervously into the darkness below. It was too wide to jump, and there was no clear way around. "We can't stay here," Jacob said, his voice tense. "What if they catch up?" Emily examined the ravine, her sharp mind already working on a solution. Her gaze fell on a cluster of long, vine-like plants hanging from the rocks above. They looked sturdy enough to hold their weight. "Help me pull these down," she said, pointing to the vines. The children worked together, tugging at the vines until they fell to the ground. Emily tied them together into a makeshift rope, securing one end to a jagged rock. She tested the rope's strength, then tossed it across the ravine, where it caught on a protruding boulder. "One at a time," she instructed. "Hold on tight, and don't look down." The children crossed the ravine, their movements slow but steady. When it was her turn, Emily glanced back toward the ship. In the distance, she saw the faint glow of Draxian searchlights cutting through the dust storm. They were coming. She gritted her teeth and climbed across, pulling the rope behind her once she reached the other side. The group pressed on, their pace quickening as the searchlights grew brighter. Suddenly, a guttural roar echoed across the landscape, freezing them in their tracks. Emily turned to see a massive four-legged creature emerging from the shadows. Its skin was a mottled gray, its eyes glowing a sickly green. Rows of sharp, jagged teeth glinted as it snarled, saliva dripping from its mouth. The predator was unlike anything Emily had ever seen, and it was clearly hunting them. "Run," she shouted, grabbing Leah's arm and pulling her forward. The group sprinted across the rocky terrain, the creature gaining on them with terrifying speed. Emily's mind raced as she searched for a way to slow it down. Her gaze fell on a cluster of bioluminescent plants growing near a narrow canyon ahead. "This way," she called, leading the children into the canyon. The walls of the canyon were steep and lined with the glowing plants. Emily stopped and knelt near one of them, her fingers brushing against its leaves. A sticky, viscous substance coated her hands, and she noticed that the plant emitted a faint, chemical-like odor. "It's a trap," she realized, her eyes lighting up. "These plants are bait." The predator entered the canyon, its massive frame squeezing through the narrow walls. Emily grabbed a handful of the sticky plant substance and smeared it across a pile of rocks near the entrance. She then motioned for the children to hide behind an outcropping. The creature sniffed the air, its glowing eyes locking onto the bait. As it lunged for the rocks, Emily gave the signal. The children pushed against a loose boulder, sending it crashing down onto the predator. The creature roared in pain as the rocks pinned it in place, its thrashing body kicking up clouds of dust. "Go," Emily yelled, leading the group out of the canyon. They didn't stop running until the sounds of the predator faded into the distance. Exhausted but alive, they collapsed behind a rocky outcrop, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. "That was insane," Jacob said, his face pale. "How did you even think of that?" Emily shrugged, her expression serious. "We can't fight them head-on. We have to outsmart them." The battle begins. The moon's barren expanse was silent, save for the faint hum of distant searchlights and the low growl of the planet's ever-present winds. Emily crouched behind a jagged rock formation, her mind racing as she scanned the horizon. The Draxians were closing in, their searchlights slicing through the dark terrain. There was no room for error now. Every step, every move could mean the difference between survival and capture. "Emily," Jacob whispered, his voice trembling. "They're getting closer. What do we do?" Emily turned to face the group, her gaze steady. "We make it harder for them to find us." She reached into her notepad, pulling out sketches of the alien weaponry and equipment they had observed on the ship. Emily had memorized every detail, and now she was about to put that knowledge to use. "There are plants here that react to touch," Emily explained, pointing to the glowing flora scattered across the landscape. "If we can rig some traps with these and create decoys, we might be able to confuse them." The group nodded, their fear replaced by determination. Under Emily's guidance, they began setting up simple traps using the sticky bioluminescent plants and sharp rocks. Every trap was designed to disorient and slow down the Draxians, forcing them to waste time and resources. Meanwhile, above the moon's surface, Earth's fleet had arrived. Admiral Marcus stood on the bridge of the Resolute, his steely gaze locked on the massive holographic display before him. The Draxian ship loomed large on the screen, its damaged hull glowing faintly as it rested on the moon. They'd fortified their position, Marcus observed, but they're vulnerable. Their propulsion is down, and their defenses are scattered. A young officer approached, saluting crisply. "Sir, we've detected faint life signs on the moon." "It's them, the children." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Good. Prepare the drop pods. We're bringing them home." As Earth's fleet launched a barrage of drop pods and fighters, the Draxians scrambled to respond. Their reinforcements had arrived. A fleet of sleek, menacing ships that shimmered in the moonlight. The two forces clashed in a symphony of light and sound, laser fire streaking through the void and explosions lighting up the darkness. Back on the moon, Emily and her group watched as the sky erupted in chaos. Streaks of light from the orbital battle rained down, illuminating the rocky landscape. The children's faces reflected a mixture of awe and fear. "Is that Earth?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. Emily nodded, her chest tightening with a surge of hope. "They're here." But their moment of relief was short-lived. The ground trembled as the Draxians, now aware of Earth's presence, launched an all-out assault. Massive walkers, bristling with alien weaponry, lumbered across the terrain, their heavy footsteps shaking the moon. Swarms of drones buzzed through the air, their searchlights sweeping relentlessly. Emily's mind raced. They couldn't outrun this. They had to fight back. "Everyone, to the traps," she commanded. The children sprang into action, luring the Draxians into their makeshift defenses. As one of the massive walkers stepped into a trap, its leg became ensnared in the sticky, glowing plants. The alien machinery sparked and groaned, its systems faltering as it struggled to free itself. Meanwhile, Emily led a small group toward one of the downed drones. Its sleek, metallic frame was still intact, its controls glowing faintly. Emily's fingers moved deftly over the interface, her father's lessons about technology flooding back to her. She managed to reprogram the drone, turning it against its own kind. The drone took off, firing on the Draxians and creating chaos among their ranks. Emily couldn't help but smile as she watched the enemy struggle to regain control. At the same time, the battle in orbit raged on. Admiral Marcus directed Earth's forces with precision, his tactical brilliance shining through. The Earth fleet, though outnumbered, used its superior technology and ingenuity to outmaneuver the Draxians. Marcus's flagship, the Resolute, unleashed a devastating barrage, crippling several enemy ships. On the moon, the children's traps and Emily's leadership continued to frustrate the Draxians. But the aliens were relentless, and their superior numbers began to take their toll. One of the children, a young girl named Sarah, tripped and fell as a Draxian soldier approached. "No," Emily shouted, rushing to help. In a moment of pure instinct, Emily grabbed a shard of alien metal and lunged at the soldier, striking its armored leg. The alien roared, momentarily distracted, giving Sarah enough time to escape. Emily's heart pounded as she pulled Sarah to safety. "We don't leave anyone behind," she said firmly. The group regrouped behind a large rock formation, their breaths ragged but their spirits unbroken. In the distance, they saw a wave of Earth soldiers descending from drop pods, their weapons blazing as they engaged the Draxians. "They're here," Jacob cried, his voice filled with relief. Emily nodded, but her expression remained serious. "We're not done yet. We need to meet them halfway." The children began moving toward the Earth soldiers, carefully navigating the battlefield. As they reached the front lines, Emily spotted Admiral Marcus, his imposing figure commanding the troops with authority. "Admiral," she shouted, waving her arms. Marcus turned, his stern face softening as he saw the children. He stepped forward, kneeling to meet Emily's gaze. "You did this," he said, his voice filled with a mix of pride and amazement. "You held them off." Emily nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "We're not safe yet. They'll be back." Turning the tables. The moon's surface burned with the remnants of battle as the Earth's soldiers and children regrouped behind makeshift barricades. The sky was alive with the flashes of laser fire and explosions from the ongoing space battle above. Emily stood alongside Admiral Marcus, her notepad and makeshift tools in hand. Despite the chaos, her eyes were focused and unyielding. "We can't just hold the line," Marcus said, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "The Drexians will keep sending reinforcements." Emily looked up at him, her small frame dwarfed by his imposing presence. "What if we don't wait for them to send more? What if we stop them here and now?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" Emily unfolded her notepad, showing a sketch of the alien device she had salvaged earlier. "This thing," she said, pointing to the glowing core, "is more than a weapon. It's connected to their ship's power grid. If we can get it back to their ship and overload it, we could disable their entire fleet." Marcus studied the sketch, his military mind quickly piecing together the possibilities. "It's risky. You'd have to get inside their ship, past their defenses." Emily smirked. "I've already been inside. I know the way." Marcus hesitated, clearly torn. "You're brave, kid, but this isn't just a game." "It's not a game," Emily said, her voice firm. "It's our lives. If we don't take the fight to them, they'll keep coming for us." Her determination was contagious. Marcus nodded, turning to his officers. "Prep a strike team. We're going in." As the Earth forces prepared for the mission, Emily gathered her group of children. They were battered and tired, but still willing to help. Emily handed each of them small tasks: scouting, carrying supplies, and even helping with strategy. Every child had a role to play. "You don't have to come," she said to Mia as they prepared to move. "This is going to be dangerous." Mia shook her head, her expression resolute. "We've come this far. I'm not stopping now." Emily smiled, grateful for the support. Together with the Earth soldiers, they made their way toward the Drexian ship, moving through the rocky terrain under the cover of darkness. The Drexian ship loomed like a fortress, its damaged hull sparking and groaning under the strain of its earlier crash. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their glowing red eyes scanning the shadows. Emily motioned for the group to stop, her sharp eyes studying the patrol patterns. "There's a maintenance hatch on the other side," she whispered. "If we time it right, we can slip through while they're distracted." Marcus gave the signal, and a squad of Earth soldiers opened fire on the far side of the ship, drawing the Drexians' attention. Emily and her group moved quickly, darting toward the hatch. She pressed a series of buttons on the control panel, her hand steady despite the urgency. The hatch hissed open, and they slipped inside. The interior of the ship was a maze of dark corridors and flickering lights. Emily led the way, her memory of the layout guiding them. They encountered a few Drexian soldiers, but the Earth soldiers dispatched them with swift precision. Finally, they reached the engine room. The glowing conduits pulsed with energy, their alien hum filling the space. Emily approached the central console, her hands trembling slightly as she connected the salvage device to the main power grid. "Once I activate this, we'll have about 5 minutes before it overloads," she said, her voice steady. "We need to be out of here before that happens." Marcus nodded. "You heard her. Everyone, prepare to move." Emily took a deep breath and pressed the activation button. The device began to glow brighter, its core humming with increasing intensity. The ship shuddered, and alarms blared as the system began to overload. "Move," Marcus shouted. The group sprinted through the corridors, the ship's structure groaning as the power grid destabilized. The Drexians, realizing what was happening, scrambled to stop them, but the Earth soldiers held them off, providing cover fire as the group made their escape. As they emerged onto the moon's surface, the Draxian ship erupted in a blinding explosion. The shockwave knocked them to the ground, but Emily looked up to see the enemy fleet above faltering. The overload had sent a cascading failure through their systems, disabling their ships and leaving them vulnerable. In orbit, Earth's fleet seized the opportunity. Admiral Marcus's voice boomed over the comms. "All ships, engage. Finish them off." Earth's forces launched a final assault, their advanced weaponry overwhelming the crippled Draxian fleet. One by one, the enemy ships were destroyed or forced to retreat. Back on the moon, Emily and the others watched as the night sky lit up with the remnants of the battle. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence. The Draxians had been defeated. "You did it," Marcus said, turning to Emily. "You saved us." Emily shook her head. "We all did." Victory and aftermath. The smoke from the destroyed Draxian fleet lingered in the night sky, a testament to humanity's resilience and determination. The Earth soldiers and children stood together on the moon's barren surface, their bodies weary but their spirits unbroken. Admiral Marcus gazed at the wreckage above, his expression a mix of triumph and relief. Yet he knew the battle wasn't entirely over. There was still unfinished business. Emily sat on a rocky outcrop, her notepad in her lap, and her face illuminated by the faint glow of the remaining bioluminescent plants. She had been sketching the alien technology, already thinking of ways it could be studied and repurposed. Marcus approached her, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over the small girl. "You're a remarkable kid," Marcus said, his gruff voice softer than usual. "Most adults wouldn't have had the courage to do what you did." Emily looked up, her expression thoughtful. "I just didn't want them to win." Marcus chuckled, but his face grew serious. "They're going to regroup, you know. The Draxians don't take defeat lightly. They'll come back. And next time, they'll come harder." Emily nodded. "Then we need to be ready."